Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the IHI Call Days, Call 5 single-stage call rules and procedures. This week, we are going to be focusing only on Call 5. And before we start, I'm going to read a disclaimer. So we are recording this session, and it will be published on the IHI website and the Bit2Match platform. We will also publish the presentation slides. All information regarding future IHI call topics is indicative and subject to change. Final information about future IHI calls will be communicated after approval by the IHI Governing Board. Here you can see a slide with the different sessions that we're holding this week. So if you haven't joined already these sessions, please do so on your profile in the IHI Bit2Match platform. And also the most important part, apart from the IHI rules and procedures, will be the financial part of the proposal that will take place the 29th of June. My name is Sergio, sorry because I didn't say it before, and I will be moderating this session today. I'm here with my colleague Polybios, who is going to be introducing the rules and procedures. So without further ado, please, Polybios, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sergio. Thank you for organizing this webinar with Sarah. Dear participants, together with my colleague Desmond Barry, who is our legal NIP officer in IHI, we will present you today the rules and procedures webinar, and focusing mostly on the participation, the funding, the intellectual property. We'll give you also some tips from call to grant award. We will provide you the indicative timelines of the single stage call 5, and also some points to remember while you're preparing your application. Starting now with the single stage calls. It's very important though to understand the structure of the single stage, especially for the ones that are really new to the Horizon Europe, but also to IHI, because we envisage to have more single stage calls comparing to IMI2 and IMI1, which are more bottom-up calls, and there is also some flexibility in terms of the application procedure. IHI program is mostly focusing on the RIA and innovation actions that we operate under Horizon Europe. And importantly to say that during the single stage call, you will be needed to submit a full proposal, a proposal of 50 pages. During this process, importantly, you really need to self-assess the public and the private actors in order to cover the full value chain of the healthcare sector in order to meet the objectives of the call topic. And when I say healthcare sector, means that you can have entities from academia, SMEs, larger companies, regulators, etc. Your application will be assessed on the basis of the required expertise in order to reach the objectives mentioned in the topic text. And importantly, you really need to carefully read it. In order to better understand the single stage process, we could introduce this slide with a schematic of a single stage different steps. IHI is a pen holder of the topic text, but at the same time, we seek input from the wider research community, but also from our members and contributing partners. The draft topic texts go through a consultation process with the advisory bodies, the Science and Innovation Panel, but also the state representative group. And the final topic text is adopted by our governing board, and it's a part of the work program. As soon as we have the final topic text and approved, then we publish the call first in our website, but at the same time in the funding and tenders portal. After the submission deadline, we do the eligibility and admissibility check of the proposal submitted. As you can see here, the proposal can include the different stakeholders covering the healthcare consortium. This process, the evaluation process, is online, and each proposal is evaluated by independent experts. IHI is not evaluating the proposals, but IHI recruits external experts to perform this exercise. Depending on the evaluation of the budget, available for each topic, then the highest ranked proposals will be proposed for funding. The approval of the ranking list will take place by the governing board, and the selected proposals will go through the granting phase. This process, the grant agreement preparation process, is again an online process between IHI-JU and the selected consortium represented by the coordinator, where we will sign at the end of the process the grant agreement. Importantly, for IHI, the project partners will be requested to conclude a consortium agreement prior to the grant agreement signature. When the work program is published, you should read carefully not only the topic text, but also the call conditions. In this slide, I will give you some highlights and draw your attention in some elements that you need to take into consideration while preparing your proposals. First, the general annexes of the Horizon Europe Work Program 23-24 shall apply mutandis mutandis to the call 5. For each topic, you can see the maximum JU contribution, which will be an indicative that is set at the call. Therefore, all the estimations that you will perform about your proposal in terms of the cost should comply with also the indicative contribution. Now, I would also like to introduce a very specific eligibility criterion for our IHI calls, but my colleague Desmond will further discuss about this in a later slide. The applicant consortia must ensure that at least 45% of their action-eligible costs and costs for additional activities related to the action are provided by their contributions, meaning in-kind contribution, financial contributions, and also additional activities. And these are secured from private members and also contributing partners. To make it even more simple, each consortium should secure from the private members and the contributing partners who are part of this consortium the 45% of the action's eligible cost and the cost for additional activities. Now, the last bullet point is referring to the non-EU ICOP, meaning activities that are taking place outside of Europe. Comparing to the previous call of IHI, the cap now is for 30%. Therefore, applicants consortium should secure that maximum 30% is non-EU ICOP. However, in case during the proposal stage this percentage is not respected, please note if you're selected for funding at the grant agreement preparation phase, you really need to ensure that this 30% is respected. And at the same time, you fulfill the 45% eligibility criteria. As mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, IHI is focusing for the RIA research and innovation actions, and the page limit is 50 pages. Please note that experts will be instructed not to read above the page limit. Therefore, your proposal will be evaluated based on these merits. At the same time, applicants that envisaging to include clinical studies in the proposal, in the project, must provide details in a specific annex, and this annex is compulsory, and the template can be found in the submission system. Regarding the gender equality plan, which is new to the Horizon Europe, public bodies, research organizations, and higher education institutions will be required at the proposal stage to confirm that they have in place either a gender equality plan or equivalent strategy in order to be eligible to their proposal in order to go through the evaluation phase. Once again, this is an eligibility criterion, so this type of organizations with this legal status, they should provide with the self-declaration at the proposal stage that they have this plan or strategy. Another eligibility criteria is also the plan for dissemination, exploitation, and communication activities. Therefore, you have also to include this plan in your proposal. I would like now to connect the communication, the plan for the dissemination communication with the affordability, availability, and accessibility of the results. Why? We'll mention it right now. So, products and services that are developed based or partly based on the results of the clinical studies should be affordable, available, and accessible to the public at fair and reasonable conditions. So how we call the 3A. At this stage, for the call 5, the topics that are connected with the 3A are not available yet, but please, as soon as the work program is available to the public, you will find all the information there. But don't forget, check the special conditions for every call topic, so to see exactly how the 3A will apply. Now, to be a little bit more practical. At the proposal stage, and as part of the plan for the dissemination, exploitation, and communication activities, you will be requested to identify potential and expected project results that may be subject to the 3I conditions and broadly outline their strategy to achieve the above objectives. This aspect will be part also for the evaluation, and the independent experts will be requested to assess this element. Importantly, your applications with regards to the 3A will be during the lifetime of the project and for a period of 4 years after the project ends. And once again, it can be found in the work program. Closing here, all evaluated proposals will be ranked in a single list. Proposals above the threshold will be invited in order for the ranking to prepare the grant agreement, and of course, based on the topic available budget. Now I'll give the floor to my colleague Desmond in order to go through the eligibility to participate.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to take a few slides here to talk about general eligibility principles for Call 5. One very, very clear distinction that we're going to make straight out of the gate, there is a difference between an eligibility to participate in the project and an eligibility to receive funding. And we try and underline this during every call webinar just to make sure that people understand the difference and the nuances. So if we talk about the general eligibility to participate, as we have here in the yellow box, any legal entity, regardless of its place of establishment or where it's working, can participate in the actual project. So if you're a company coming, for instance, coming from anywhere in the world, you're eligible to participate as long as you're bringing something relevant to the actual project. That is, as we've clarified in the green box underneath, distinct from eligibility for funding, and we'll get to that right now. So in terms of eligibility, we've prepared this slide because it provides a pretty good snapshot of what's basically required for a consortium to be valid under the general eligibility conditions first, and then it goes into the nuances underneath. So as you can see here, in terms of the consortium, we need one independent legal entity which is established in a member state and at least 2 other independent legal entities, each established either in a different member state or an associated country. Now we keep flagging independent legal entities because obviously they have to be separate and distinct entities. It's no use to basically have 3 subsidiaries of the same firm, even if they're established in different member states, and say that this is viable, because there could be issues there in relation to whether one controls the other or whether they're all controlled by a different entity. So that's something to flag. In terms then of those definitions we've just given you underneath, then I think in terms of EU countries, I mean that's self-explanatory. It includes their overseas territories, obviously. Non-EU countries can then be divided into a couple of different categories, but if for purposes in terms of eligibility for funding, we turn towards those countries that are associated to the Horizon Europe program. Now, that normally takes the form of an actual separate and distinct Horizon Europe Association Agreement, which is executed between the country and the European Commission. If you look at the program guide there that we were referring to on the second middle bullet point, the HE program guide, which is available online, that actually gives both a list of the Horizon Europe associated countries, and it also gives a list of the low and middle income countries, the LMICs, that are also potentially entities from those countries are also potentially eligible for funding also. On the right-hand side, then we have a couple of particular points that we want to draw attention to. So as I said, the association agreements are between the member states and the EU, and they produce legal effects, and obviously then that opens the way for funding. We also have a couple of countries that we could best describe as in transitional agreements at the moment. So the first one is the UK. As we know, an association agreement between the UK and the EU, it's anticipated to be signed. It hasn't actually been signed yet. So at the moment, the IHI, to reflect the wider European position, is that UK-based applicants, while they are treated as beneficiaries and eligible for funding for the purposes of the proposal submission, we will basically monitor that, and then when we get to the grant agreement preparation stage at the end, when everything is agreed in a consortium agreement, etc., we will look again. If there is still no association agreement in place, then those UK entities should be treated instead of beneficiaries as associated partners, and that is the role that they should take in the actual grant agreement. So associated partners, for instance, they don't actually sign the grant agreement directly, but they are identified in the grant agreement. They still can contribute to the actual project. But the key difference here is that in the event where these UK associated partners are taking part in the project and there's no association agreement in place, then such legal entities will be receiving funding from the UK via the UKRI. So I would urge, even at this early stage, anyone who is considering, if they are a UK-based entity and they're considering being involved in a proposal to address one of the Call 5 topics, they should actually contact the UKRI and establish exactly what the rules are and exactly what is needed to ensure that they register in good time and they can secure funding in the event that their particular proposal goes forward. Obviously, if an association agreement is executed in the meantime, before we actually get to GAP, then obviously the situation will be different and we'll deal with that. And then lastly, at the bottom, as we have in red here, Switzerland is currently not covered by the transitional arrangement. It's our understanding from anecdotal information that such an agreement is actually in the process of being done. However, at the moment, again, Switzerland is not associated with the UK, or sorry, with the EU, and therefore we're treating the Switzerland entities as associated partners going forward. Obviously, we will keep everyone updated if that situation changes in the meantime. Then, in terms of the let's say the specific political situations across the world, we have a couple of particular derogations from the normal funding rules, which basically state that everyone is eligible to participate and some are eligible for funding. So given the situation in the Ukraine at the moment, as you can see in the top box, the rule is that legal entities established in Russia, Belarus, or in non-governmental controlled territories of the Ukraine are not eligible to participate in any capacity. So they cannot become involved in the grant agreement and they cannot receive funding. So it's beneficiaries, affiliated entities, associated partners, third parties, giving basically all of the classification of participants that would be identified in the normal Horizon Europe grant agreement. Such entities from Russia, Belarus, or areas of the Ukraine that are not government controlled are indeed excluded fully. And that's not just IHI, that's been implemented across the EU Horizon Europe structure. And then the second case is slightly more refined. It's basically in relation to Hungary. And this position has evolved over the last year or two. And basically, if you go down to the actual second point, it basically states that no European funds, so that's IHI funding, are made available directly or indirectly to third parties that are public interest trusts established on the basis of the Hungarian Act 9 of 2021. So what that basically means is, and I think we received this question in the last Rules and Procedures webinar that we did, If indeed you are a Hungarian entity and you're querying as to whether you are able to receive funding if you're going through an IHI project, what we would say is look to your own constitution or to your own legal basis. Is the basis of your constitution or your articles of association a public interest trust? If so, then the chances are that you will not be eligible for funding. But if there's any questions, we would of course ask you to refer the question to IHI. We can look into it in more detail using the applicant mailbox linked address that we'll provide a bit later on. Now, in terms of those entities eligible for funding, so just to make this clear, and I think Plivius touched on this a little earlier on, depending upon the type of call, the funding rules can be slightly different. So this is a single stage call. On the basis of that, therefore, any legal entity, as I said, anywhere is basically eligible to participate. This is fine. In terms of funding, then, if you're basically coming from the EU or the associated countries or the LMICs, the low and middle income countries, then generally you're eligible for funding as well. If you can look at the bottom right hand corner there, we actually have a pink box there just to really clarify it. Strictly speaking, if you're not from a member state or an associated country or an LMIC, then you are what's called a third country, which is basically what the UK is falling under at the moment and Switzerland is falling under. But it would also, such third countries would also include, for instance, the US. So generally, entities coming from the US, for example, are not eligible for funding. But we can, under very exceptional circumstances, when it's recommended by the experts evaluators, when the information is put into the actual proposal and the request is actually made, IHI can consider funding such entities from third countries if it's deemed necessary for the participation for the essential success of the actual project. In single stage calls there, just to develop it a bit further, then, as you can see, the eligibility for funding can be the non-profits and the traditional, let's say the traditional academic institutions, and also because it's a single stage call and this mirrors what's done in the Horizon Europe larger program, for-profit legal entities, both SMEs and larger enterprises, again, if they are from the EU or associated countries or the LMICs, can actually receive funding to address a Call 5 single stage call topic. And then the funding rules, I'm actually going to pass you over to. Okay. Okay. I'll do it. So sorry. For these actual issues in terms of the funding, then we provided a slide to just give a bit more detail. So because the language jumps around a bit, we want to make sure that we're all using the same language and everyone understands what we're talking about, both in the slides and in the webinar and in the individual topic webinars that we're going to do as well. So in terms of the specific types of participants, IHI has a number of members. You remember that it's a joint undertaking. It's a collaboration between the EU, which could be regarded, and the European Commission, which could be regarded as the the public member, and then specific private members. They're called private members on the legal basis, and there are 4 of those, and that's COSIR, Europa, MedTech, and FPA. And FPA obviously includes their Vaccine Europe subgroup. Those private members, those trade associations, they don't necessarily take part in projects, IHI projects directly. What happens is that their constituent or affiliated entities are the ones who actually take part in the actual projects. So when Plivius was talking earlier about, for instance, contributions of in kind towards this 45% eligibility threshold, we would be expecting sometimes in kind from the constituent or affiliated entities of the private members rather than the private members themselves to accrue towards that 45%. So they're the members and they're the companies that actually make up the members, and I think this is clear for everyone. Contributing partners is slightly different. Contributing partners is a continuation of a program that we had under IMI2, which was extremely successful, which was associated partners. They're now called contributing partners. And what contributing partners, as it says here, they're legal entities interested in supporting IHIJU's objectives in specific areas of research. They're not members. They're not one of the trade associations. They cannot be a constituent or an affiliated entity of the trade members. They have to be or the private members. They have to be separate and distinct. So I think a good example here would be, perhaps one of the philanthropic organizations coming from the US, maybe the Gates Foundation, maybe the Simon Foundation. But we had lots from the EU as well. And basically what they do is, again, they provide in-kind and financial contributions towards particular projects. Now, it's not actually quite that simple, because if you want to become a contributing partner, what you do is you basically first you read the guide which you've prepared, which is on the website. Then you basically submit a letter to the IHI governing board, and in that application letter, you lay out exactly what it is that you're actually bringing to the actual project. You're saying, look, this is the in-kind that we're actually going to provide. This is the financial contributions that we're actually going to provide. This is why these particular contributions are useful towards the objectives for IHI and what the particular project or proposal is trying to do. You also state in that letter that you are not in any way connected to one of the private members or their constituent entities or affiliated entities. That's extremely important. Because we cannot have any overlap between the two. And then the last bullet point I had at the end was, and this is important, we'll cover this in a subsequent slide, contributing partners do not contribute in kind towards additional activities, and we'll drill into that distinction a little bit later on. So for the application, as I said, it can be any country, international organization, or legal entity that's going to contribute towards the specific objectives, that will accept the legal framework of the IHIJU and submit a letter of application that details the scope of the engagement, that will observe the deadlines for the application letter, and that the application is then accepted by the governing board. The IHI governing board will scrutinize every application that comes in. By the time it gets to the governing board, our in-house legal team, particularly my colleague Carolina from the legal team, will have basically reviewed the actual letter and make sure that it's got all the assets or all the ingredients that it needs to be acceptable for the actual governing board. And then the governing board will make a decision as to whether the contributing partner is a good addition to IHI. To provide some clarity on this, because I know we've just given you quite a lot of information in relation to CPs, we've added this slide in here. So as I said, bullet point 1, absolutely essential. Before you apply to become a contributing partner, make sure that your legal entity is not affiliated directly or via a regional or local organization to any IHI private member. Again, COSIR, FPA, including the vaccine subgroup, Europa Bio and MedTech. We have built a dedicated section on the IHI website for contributing partners. It includes a guide, which is a PDF there, which you can download and you can actually read. It's quite detailed, and we put a lot of work into it. You make sure that your contribution is eligible in accordance with Article 6 of the grant agreement. Now, what that basically means is that if you're actually going to contribute in kind, it has to meet the definition of in kind, which is in the IHI grant agreement. And the typical examples here, this has to be something concrete. It has to be a cost which you're actually incurring. So you can't just apply a nominal value to your contribution. You can't just basically say, well, my contribution is going to be worth 4 million without any backup. This has to be something, a cost which you're actually going to incur. Generally, it's a line item in the actual contributing partners' accounts. We go into quite a lot of detail of that in the guide. And then if you need further clarification, you can of course contact the legal team. We can answer the question. Just under the second to last paragraph there kind of elaborates what I've just said. In particular, the costs that the contributing partner is going to contribute, they should be actual, they should be recorded in the accounting system of the given CP. They should be identifiable and verifiable and incurred during the project implementation. And then lastly, we do have definite timeframes for when the letters can actually be accepted. So if you're contemplating being a contributing partner, we would urge you to download the guide in good time, read the actual guide, prepare the application letter, contact the IHI office, and then, as I said, the legal team, particularly Carolina, will be able to assist you if there's any particular information or if you have any queries. Then we've prepared the slide in relation to contribution types. So now that we know what a private member is, now we know what a contributing partner is, we're cross-referencing it with the type of contributions that these entities can actually make. So, as I said, ECOP, which is in kind towards operational activities, both private members and contributing partners can contribute that. This is very clear. Similarly, financial contributions, which is generally cash, which goes from the project beneficiaries from the same consortium to eligible costs during the project implementation. Generally, those financial contributions go to other members of the consortium. And lastly, EKAA, you'll recall me saying, I think 2 slides ago, while the constituent and affiliated entities of the private members can contribute EKAA towards the additional activities, the contributing partners cannot do this. And we say this on the website, and we say this in the contributing partner guide, and I think we actually say it now in the application letter as well. So it should be clear that CPs shouldn't be contributing any in kind towards additional activities. The 45% eligibility criterion. So Polybius has touched on this, and we have a formula here, which can be a bit intimidating. I think the best thing we can say in relation to this is that without the 45% eligibility criteria, a proposal is not viable. This is a hard and strict eligibility criteria. So it's 45%, it's the costs related to the contributions which is being supplied by the proposal, the applicant consortium. It includes ECOP, EKAA, again, EKAA from everyone except the contributing partners, and or financial contribution provided by the private members, CPs, constituent entities, affiliated entities, and it's non-negotiable. Now, the advice that we actually give is the rule that says 45%, but it's generally good practice to aim for 50% instead, just to allow for variations. Oh, actually, we have that in the next slide, which thank you, Polybius, for changing the slide. And indeed, that is a very prudent approach. And so we cannot emphasize this enough. It does not matter how wonderful your proposal is. It does not matter if you're actually going to do some really impressive science. It does not matter if the independent experts are going to be really impressed with your proposal. If you don't hit that 45% threshold, and we will analyze it first at the proposal stage, and then if you do get through, if indeed you are selected for funding, we will analyze it again at the gap stage, at the grant agreement preparation stage, and you have to have 45% at both stages, and then we will monitor it through the project lifetime as well. Just to let you know, our colleague, Gail, who is our financial expert, she is doing a info session this Friday, the 29th of June, between 2 and 3:30, where she's going to go into a lot of detail on this stuff. So if you are listening to this rules and procedures webinar, I would strongly recommend you to put the time aside and pay very, very close attention to Gail's presentation this week. If you can't actually make that slot, I think it's going to be recorded as well, so it will be available on the website in good time. But it's if you can manage it, we would strongly recommend your attendance, and you can register for it now. So that's kind of the eligibility and the contributing partners, and just a brief mention of the 45% threshold. I'm going to do a couple of slides here just to talk about IP, the intellectual property. Obviously, IHI projects, because of the nature of the industry we're in, an awful lot of intellectual property is generated during the actual project. So I'm going to give just 2, maybe 3 slides, just a broad overview, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So as we've identified in this slide, basically the grant agreement, which everyone will be signing, or at least adhering to, identifies some key IP terminology. The first one is background, then results, then access rights. So if you look at the 2 boxes as a workflow of the actual project, on the left-hand side at the start, you have background identification. So what will happen is background, which is identified as any data, know-how, or information, which is held by the beneficiaries before they join the grant agreement, and it's needed to implement the action or exploit the results. That is identified right at the project start. It's agreed between the actual project participants. It's listed in the project consortium agreement. We'll talk about the consortium agreement a bit later on, but generally it's Annex 1 in the consortium agreement, and all of the background that everyone is bringing, that it is agreed that everyone is bringing, will be put into the actual consortium agreement. And then that background, if we move to the second box, which is the implementation of the action, that background is then frequently used to generate results. And results, going to definition number 2, is a tangible or intangible effect of the action, data, know-how, information, whatever its form, and any rights attached to it, including IP rights. So if you think of, in terms of a project, background in, results out is probably the best way to look at it. Results, let me just make this point so everyone understands, results are owned at first point by the beneficiaries that generate them. Now, both background and results have access rights attached. An access right is a right, an intellectual property right, to use that asset. So when you bring background, for example, into an IHI project, the other beneficiaries in the project will have automatic access rights to use your background so they can get their own jobs in the project actually done. Similarly, if you actually generate results in that actual project, then the other beneficiaries will have access rights to those results so they can get their own stuff done in the project. We should point out here that these access rights that we're talking about, that doesn't include commercialization. So if you are bringing background to the project, you can bring it with confidence. You don't have to worry about someone basically taking it and commercializing it without your consent. So that's an important point. Second slide. So there's a couple of permutations here that we really need to discuss. So if you are familiar with IMI2, you'll know that IMI2 had its own, let's say its own slight flavor of the wider Horizon 2020 IP rules. We don't have that in IHI. IHI intellectual property rules are identical with a couple of nuances that I'm going to talk about now with the wider Horizon Europe program. So if you know the Horizon Europe intellectual property rules, the IHI rules will feel very comfortable and very similar. A couple of minor points. For those intellectual property rules I'm talking about, we're referring, of course, in the normal model grant agreement, Article 16 is where you start. But then, because we are a joint undertaking, you go to Annex 5, which is at the end of the grant agreement, and Annex 5 describes specific intellectual property rules for use by the joint undertakings. But for another, then you drill down further and you will actually find that within Annex 5, which is the JU intellectual property rules, there are further rules specifically for IHI. So basically you're going to three separate places. But once you actually find Annex 5 and you find the IHI references in Annex 5, you're on pretty solid ground. And then also sometimes we refer to things in the applicable call conditions that were in the work program as well. So the ones that we flag here at this stage, because it's important, is the third bullet point, which is the right to object. So strictly speaking, and without going into too much detail, what the right to object basically means is that if you are a beneficiary and you generate results in an IHI project, if you want to transfer or exclusively license those results to another entity, generally a third party, outside of the project and in a non-EU, non-associated country jurisdiction, then you need to inform IHI, and IHI has the right to object. Now, this is something very, very similar to which is existing across the Horizon Europe program. What's different in IHI, and just like the other joint undertakings, is that whereas in Horizon Europe, that only applies to those beneficiaries who are receiving funding, for IHI, this applies to every single beneficiary and participant in the grant agreement. So it doesn't matter whether you are receiving funding or not, this right to object actually applies. That said, and again, I won't go into too much detail here, but there is a way, if you want to actually transfer something outside the jurisdiction and you think that's going to affect, whether you can join the grant agreement in the first place, you can actually contact the IHI office, and we've developed a system where we can discuss it ahead of time. So as I said, if this is sensitive, this doesn't mean you have to withdraw. It just means that you should open a dialogue with us quite early. Second point, affordable access provision. So Polybius has actually mentioned these are the famous 3A: affordable, available, accessible. So what I would say on this point is that obviously this has particular IP implications. Strictly speaking, when you check the call conditions, when the call topic texts are made available, it will say both in the work program and in the special conditions for your particular call whether 3A will apply specifically to your topic and therefore to your project. So this is something to keep in mind, and if it applies, then you start thinking about it straight away at the proposal stage. Another difference which we should flag is that now at the end of every IHI project, just like at the Horizon Europe projects, there's now compiled an ROL, a results ownership list, which has to be submitted at the end of the actual project. That's very useful now because it allows our side to basically identify every single result that was actually generated in the project and who owns it, and that makes it much clearer as to how the actual project developed and who did what. That doesn't preclude obviously transfers of the results. And then lastly, we basically have an emphasis on exploitation and open science. So we utilize the open science dissemination model. And this is somewhat unlikely in IHI projects, but it could happen. If project results are unexploited by the actual beneficiaries that generated them, then they can be matched with interested parties in the Horizon Europe platform. We have there in red just to flag this, and I'll mention it again in a couple of slides, but project intellectual property rights specificities you have the high level rules in terms of the access rights in the model grant agreement, in, as I said, Article 16, and then in our Annex 5, and then in the subset for IHI in Annex 5. However, the day-to-day management of the intellectual property rights is detailed in the consortium agreement. And that's somewhere where you basically talk about what constitutes a written request for an access right and when you have to give it and the time frame. They'll probably be in the template that you choose to use, but we'll go back. We'll talk about templates in a moment. Over to Polybius.
Thank you very much, Desmond. So, going back now a little bit regarding the evaluation. As soon as we have the submission deadline and IHI performs the admissibility and eligibility phase, the proposals are moving to the next round, which is the evaluation process. Each proposal is assessed by the minimum 3 independent experts, but in IHI, due to the complexity of our course, the size of the budget, and also the technical nature of the subject that covers cross-sectorial considerations, we have more than 3 independent experts. I would say 4 to 5, in order to ensure that the proposals are evaluated to the best conditions. Then each proposal is evaluated as it is, not as what could be. Therefore, the experts cannot make assumptions. They evaluate what they see during, in the 50 pages of your proposal. Therefore, you should be clear and precise. Each criterion is called from 0 to 5. Excellence, impact, and implementation, and the threshold for each criterion is 3. However, even if you take the threshold, you reach the threshold for each criterion, which the sum is 9, and you fail to have to reach the threshold on the overall, which means 10, your proposal will be rejected. The evaluation criteria, excellence, impact, and implementation are mostly following the proposal template, and you really need to read carefully the proposal template because all the requested information are included there. One piece of advice, you should pay equal attention to the 3 evaluation criteria. Don't think that excellence is more important than impact, or impact more important than implementation. We've seen in the past really interesting proposals scoring really high in excellence and impact, and for example, failing in the implementation. When we went back to understand why this happened, is mostly the applicants didn't spend enough time to organize themselves in terms of the implementation because they put more efforts in excellence and impact. So our advice here is to pay equal attention to the 3 evaluation criteria, and at the same time strictly follow the proposal template. Another piece of advice here is to also make your proposal template as a checklist. This is an advice that I give a lot to the applicants. Because the proposal template, all the elements included there is how the experts will cross-check, so they go against this, let's say, checklist in order to assess whether all the requested elements from the proposal template are reflected in the proposal itself. And especially for the ones that are really dealing with the science, don't concentrate only, for example, in the scientific aspects. In certain cases in the proposal template, you might have also other type of information requested that maybe is not really your field, and then you might seek support and feedback from other part of the consortium in order to address such points. Regarding the proposal template and annexes, following the Horizon Europe structure, the proposal consists of 2 parts, the part A and the part B, and the annexes. The part A is automatically generated by the IT tool. It includes information on the proposals, for example, details of the participants, the budget, information on ethics and security, and also information on clinical studies that you have to complete with very much care, because certain aspects of the proposal template will be also part of the eligibility phase afterwards. The proposal template part B is the narrative part, is the PDF to be uploaded on the portal. And as I already mentioned, the proposal template, the part B, is following the 3 sections of excellence, impact, and implementation. In IHI, we have also some either mandatory or optional annexes that really help during the evaluation process. The first annex is the type of participants. Even though the experts will be instructed not to assess this annex, and this is mandatory, it's very important though for IHI, because by completing this annex, you will help us also to report on certain obligations we have under Horizon Europe as institutions. So please, the coordinator should pay attention to this type of participants annex, because this will also support IHI activities. The second annex is the declaration of in-kind contributions commitment. The coordinator will sign this commitment on behalf of the consortium for the 45%, minimum 45% of in-kind contribution that will be provided by the private members or contributing partners in order to ensure the eligibility criterion is respected of the 45%. As Desmond mentioned before, some projects might also provide in-kind contribution to additional activities. These additional activities, of course, should be assessed by the experts. Therefore, we have an optional annex, because some proposals may have, some others may not, additional activities. And to the ones that they have to follow strictly the template provided also in the submission environment. You can download from there this specific annex and to complete it carefully. For the projects, for the proposals, that will also include information for clinical studies, they should also provide an annex which is part of the submission environment, the template. Unfortunately, here it says optional annex, because this is the case for the previous course of IHI. We will update this slide in order to change the optional to compulsory, because this will be available also in the submission environment. Now, for the proposals that they will not include clinical studies, the coordinator should be requested to upload a PDF document confirming that their proposal will not involve clinical studies, in order to be able to submit at the end the proposal to IHI. The next annex is ethics, and this is optional annex. There is no specific template. As I mentioned before, in the part A, you have all the ethics information that you have to complete. In certain cases, the coordinators on behalf of the project, of the proposal consortium, would like to provide more information about the ethics self-assessment. Therefore, we give this possibility by introducing this annex to include more info about your ethics self-assessment. So, and there is no also word counting, but be precise, so to give more information to the ethics evaluators about your ethics cases. Now, new for the single stage course for Call 5, we introduce a specific and compulsory annex, which is the budget for the full proposal. Unfortunately, in IHI, we couldn't make the budget table of the part A to include the specificities of IHI-JU, meaning the in-kind contribution, the financial contributions, and the additional activities. Therefore, we develop an Excel sheet, which is a budget table, that the coordinator will be requested to complete. And this table will be very, very helpful in order to show how your proposal meets the 45%, some information and thresholds about non-EU, like I mentioned before, of the 30% cap, etc., etc. The purpose of this webinar is not to go through the details. Desmond already advertised the webinar of our colleague Gael for this Friday. Gael will actually navigate you through the different type of contributions that correspond to the different type of participants coming from the private members and the contributing partners. We'll show you how to complete the budget table. We'll show you what kind of messages can be derived from this budget table, etc., etc. So the webinar on Friday is the one that's targeting the project managers mostly in order to build a complete and accurate proposal budget. Desmond,
Yeah.
you might help us here.
Thanks, Polybius. All right, so this is just to go back to the legal stuff for a second. I apologize. This is just one or two slides. Just to go back to the solid mechanics of how we handle the rules and such. So I made reference a little while earlier to the consortium agreement on 3 or 4 slides, and I said basically certain things are handled in the consortium agreement, like the intellectual property day-to-day rules, identifying the background and such. So let me just draw the distinction here between the two documents, because they kind of work in tandem, even though there are differences between them. So the IHI grant agreement is, as I said a few slides ago, the document which describes the high-level rules and which everybody basically, most of the participants actually sign, all the beneficiaries do. And IHI signs it as well. So the IHI grant agreement is essentially the Horizon Europe model grant agreement now. And as we say there, it contains 44 articles and it covers everything from what a beneficiary is to what the budget is, through to you know, what intellectual property rules you're actually going to use, through to liability, etc. So it's quite a comprehensive document. As I said, then it also includes the IP rules in Annex 5. The coordinator and IHI-JU itself are the only ones who technically sign the grant agreement itself. All the other beneficiaries then sign the accession form within 30 days thereafter. But that is the core document. And you know, when you actually want legal certainty as to what the rights and obligations are for an IHI project, that's actually where you go. Quick, I'll come back to this in a slide in a second, but this is a quick time to just pitch the existence of the annotated model grant agreement, which basically takes the basic grant agreement, which is 60 or 70 pages, and adds another 300 pages of examples and good practice and useful information, and that's available online. We have a link coming up on that, and I would strongly recommend anyone who you know, who's on the call who is from legal or financial background, who want to make sure they understand exactly how the IHI project should work. The AGA is your first point of call, but we'll come back to that. But apart from the grant agreement, then is the consortium agreement. The key thing about the consortium agreement is it's signed by all participants in the action, but IHI does not sign it. So essentially, it's an agreement between the consortium members as to how they're actually going to run the project. As we say there in bullet point 3, it has to comply with the rules of the grant agreement. So the consortium agreement does not offer a consortium the opportunity to decide to do certain things their own way, or basically throw out the intellectual property rules. What it more really does is basically governs the day-to-day operations of the consortium, details the various consortium governance structures, the oversight committee and that sort of thing. And basically then it can be adapted to each project depending upon, you know, what kind of participants you have in the consortium and depending upon what they actually want to do. Our last point there is very relevant. So the consortium agreement, because we don't want projects reinventing the wheel each and every time, there are a number of templates available. There's the DESCA model, which is being used through various iterations of Horizon Europe and Framework 7 before that, etc. There's also an IHI specific consortium agreement template, which was developed by legal teams from the private members. and that's available. There's a link on the IHI website. So basically, in terms of the consortium agreement, what we would say is, as long as you're using the template, as long as you basically follow the main rules, as long as it doesn't conflict with the terms of the grant agreement, you have a lot of flexibility to reflect the particularities of your own project. But the other thing I want you to understand is that that consortium agreement needs to be finalized by the time we get to grant agreement signature. And it's an essential prerequisite of IHI office signing the grant agreement that we receive confirmation in the tool via formal notification that the consortium agreement is signed and is being executed by the consortium members. But you'll hear a lot more about that going forward. And then we have timelines.
Thank you, Desmond. Since the work program hasn't been officially approved by the governing board, therefore we cannot have exact dates. I will give you some indicative timelines in order to start preparing for your proposal. We foresee the COP application end of July. So we'll launch officially the call. These will be available, all the information will be available on our website and also the funders and tenders portal. The call submission deadline for the full proposal will be mid-January 2024. We give more or less 6 months for you to build efficiently and effectively your consortium. Directly after the submission deadline, we will go through the evaluation process, the scientific evaluation. This will include also the scientific and the ethics aspects. By the end of March, we intend to finalize everything and also have the ranking approved by the governing board, and at the same time inform you about the evaluation outcome. Directly afterwards, the successful consortia will go through the grant agreement preparation phase with the IHI program office, and we target end of June as the deadline for the signature of the grant agreement. Now, would like to give you also some points to remember while preparing your proposal. Importantly, you should read all the call relevant material that will be published in our website, and don't only read the topic text, but also the call conditions. Therefore, all the relevant material of the call will be available for you, and pay attention to all aspects while preparing your proposal. At the same time, you really need to respect the page limits of 50 pages. I mentioned it several times. The experts will be instructed to read only by the page limit. And one piece of advice here, while preparing your proposal, at the same time, start thinking like an evaluator. And the way you write your proposal, think that you write it for an evaluator. This is also a way to start thinking about the structure, how to address all points from the proposal template, and at the same time, think how the evaluators will be also assessing your proposal. Once again, plan for the 45% in-kind contribution, but at the same time, try to maintain the 50%, because these eligibility criterion will follow you at the end of the project in case you are successful. So during the lifetime of the project, should maintain the 45%. So in case something goes wrong during the project implementation, at least you will have some buffer and save in terms of the eligibility in order to avoid any unhappy paths for the future. Once again, the non-EU in-kind contribution for this call, the call 5, the single stage call, is capped to 30%, comparing to the previous single stage call we had at 100%. So please ensure that you have this already at the proposal level, capped to 30%. And the budget table this annex that I mentioned before, that will be part of the proposal, will also indicate to you, in case you go above the 30%, it will be flagged and will be requested also to address it. For the contributing partners, like Desmond said, is all about strategic relevance. They need to demonstrate the potential added value of their contribution for the achievement of the objectives of the IHI-JU. Here, I will briefly mention it. The long story short is not really about money, is not about how to cap the 45%. The consortium shouldn't bring a contributing partner just to have the contribution reach the 45%. Here, we're talking about the scientific, the strategic relevance. What is the added value of this contribution to the IHI-JU project, but also to the IHI-JU program? So this one will be further assessed not only by the governing board by approving the application, but also for the experts. Experts in the evaluation would be instructed to assess whether the proposed contribution of the contributing partner is really linked to the IHI project. Therefore, the contributing partner should justify it clearly with specific examples, with specific information, how these contributions of them will contribute to the program and the project of IHI. At the same time, this contribution should fulfill the eligibility criteria specified in the Article 6.1 on the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement. For example, a licenses fees of a platform, this is not a valid eligibility criterion in terms of the cost. So while you're assessing and preparing your contributions, please make sure that these also fulfilled by the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement Article 6.1. But if you have any question, of course, you can contact us in the applicant's functional mailbox. At the same time, again, not to avoid surprises in the future, the contributing partners should make sure that are not affiliated to any private member or any other local associations that might be affiliated to IHI-JU private members. So this is really important to check in advance, because if, for example, you are connected to a regional organization which is finally linked to a private member, either COSIR, FPA, Europa Biometric Europe, then you are not a contributing partner. And in this case, the 45% will be impacted. This should be checked carefully before the application is submitted to IHI. Moving now to the next bullet point. One piece of advice is also to complete accurately the researcher's table. Don't think that in the proposal stage, by putting some researcher's name in the table will be sufficient. And then, for example, if you're selected for funding, you will go back and thoroughly update the table. No, this shouldn't be the case. Why? Because in case we have proposals with equal ranking, meaning they receive equal scores, the researcher table, meaning the information put there, including the gender balance, will be subject to determine also the ranking. So you should complete it in advance very carefully. Don't forget again, the gender equality plan is an eligibility criterion. Another one point, again, to avoid unhappy paths in case you're selected for funding, for profit organizations that are planning to act as coordinators of the project, please check in advance that you are financially viable and also your solvency is high enough in order to be successful in terms of the coordination role. At the same time, please contact IHI office, not industry or the ones who are dealing with the topics. Contact us if you have questions in the applicant's functional mailbox. At the same time, of course, you can contact the state representative group of IHI. You can find all the information in our website in case you have questions about the topics and also any aspect of the proposal preparation. Now, I would like also to take this opportunity of this webinar and advertise on our search for independent experts. IHI is continuously looking for experts to work with, either as evaluators of proposals or reviewers for ongoing projects. If you have expertise relevant to the IHI themes and you wish to work with us, and I guarantee you that will be an amazing experience, please register in the Funding Center portal, create your profile. If you have one, please update it and email us in the expert@ihi.europa.eu. Mention your profile number, and then in case your expertise is relevant for our topics, for this call or for future calls or for project reviews, we'll contact you and we'll provide you more information on how we work. Now I think I'm over to Sergio.
Thank you very much to the both of you for such an extensive presentation. Now we have reached the most important part of the webinar, which are the Q&A. So without further ado, now we have first questions. So what is JU contribution?
So let me put it very simple here. We are a public-private partnership. In single-stage projects, we really need to reflect not only scientifically this public-private partnership, meaning putting all together the healthcare consortium, but at the same time, we need to show it in terms of money. So the JU contribution is simply the in-kind contributions, the financial contributions, and then in-kind contributions to additional activities. These are the three elements that consist the JU contribution. And this amount should sum to the 45% in order for the proposal to be eligible. And like we advise, don't only aim on the 45%, aim to 50% in order to be sure that you maintain this eligibility during the project lifetime. Hopefully this is clear. And like I said, once again, Friday, webinar of Gael, all these elements will be addressed thoroughly.
Thank you very much, Polybius. We also drop a link on the chat, so if you actually follow it, you will find more information in there. Next question, while Swiss companies, institutions can receive funding from the EU, are they entitled to participate?
Like Desmond said, IHI program like Horizon Europe is open to the world. Everyone can participate, even the Swiss, UK, everyone can participate, except if you fall under the category of Russia or Hungary. The rest, simply you can be part of a proposal. Now the question, do you get money or not? For UK entities, you solve it through your UK government. For the Swiss, exactly the same. So from this point of view, yes, they can participate. And maybe also to correct, of course, for the Hungary, when I mentioned Hungary before, there are specific cases there, like Desmond said, with the specific decision of the public trust, etc., etc.
Thank you very much. Next question. Is it the understanding that, one, each call topic is evaluated separately to establish ranking? Two, only the top ranked proposals is recommended for funding per call topic?
So the way that the call 5, the single stage call structure, is not competing among topics. Each topic has its own assigned budget, and each topic at the end will be translated as a ranking list. So there is no competition among topics. Each topic has its own budget line that is reflected in the topic text. In the topic text, you can see the indicative contribution where you have to respect. So no, there is no competition. And regarding the top rank proposals, yes. So now, depending on the available budget, and depending also how much money of JU contribution each proposal will request, then we can see how many proposals will fund. If, for example, we have indicative funding of 10 million euro, and we have the highest proposal ranked is requesting 10 million euro, then we have only one proposal funded. Imagine now we have the first high ranked proposal is requesting 3 million euro, and another one 4 million euro. Then we have, for example, out of 10 million, 2 proposals funded, and so on and so forth. So depending on the budget of the high rank proposals requested.
Next question, do participants need to be affiliated with COSIR, Europa Bio, MedTech, etc.? Otherwise, a private company cannot participate?
Okay, maybe. Okay. All right. So no, I think so. When we talk about the private members, as we said, what we're talking about is someone who is affiliated or a constituent member to one of the trade associations. So the private members, again, to remind everyone, COSIR, Europa Bio, FPA, MedTech, Europe. That membership is irrespective of the fact, to underline Polybius's point, which is in these single stage calls, if you are an independent legal entity, you are completely welcome to participate, and everyone can participate. So you don't, if you're an SME or you're a larger company and you want to become involved in the project, you are more than welcome to come involved in the project. You can, under certain circumstances, even request funding, and that is separate and distinct from the other issue, which is the association or somehow affiliation with the private members.
Thank you very much. I see that we have on the chat many questions addressed for our colleague Gael. So I will actually ask you to follow the webinar this Thursday at 2. But just for the moment, we can perhaps ask our lawyers to reply. So the question is, can you specify what in-kind contribution means? In example, access to premises, training, staff exchange, and how is this agreement with IPR protection as for industrial partners, proprietary background and expertise?
Yeah, so we can actually go one better. Gail is actually on the line. So, and I know she's dying to actually answer these questions. So Gail, can you hear us here? Can you contribute? Oh, okay. All right. So we're having a couple of technical issues there with bringing Gail online. So then I think now I'm saying this knowing that Gail is actually on the call, and I'm at risk of getting pulled over. But all right. So as we said about 10 slides ago, for an in-kind contribution to actually count, all right, then basically it has to be an incurred cost. It has to be valid. We refer everyone to Article 6.1 of the actual grant agreement, which is costs in the grant agreement, and it basically lists out the set of criteria there. So it's a cost which is incurred by the participant. It's a cost which then appears actually generally on their accounts. It's something which can be traced and clearly identified. It's incurred during the execution of the actual project. It's incurred during the lifetime of the actual project. So generally costs incurred beforehand don't count, and costs incurred after don't count. Generally, there are some exceptions there. And that's the guidelines that you should actually use. So a great example here, Polybius referred to it earlier on, is that, for instance, a software license isn't actually considered a cost, because if I basically want to make software licenses available to all the other beneficiaries in the actual project, that's nice, that's great. I think that's an important contribution that I'm bringing to the project, but that is not an actual cost which I am incurring in my balance sheet. Nowhere in the sheet is it going to say Desmond, incurred X amount of euros because he copied the license 50 times or produced 50 different licenses. So I think that's the guideline that you should actually use. Something like access to premises, based on my limited understanding of financial matters, I don't think that would be regarded as costs that would be incurred by a beneficiary during the actual project. Something like personnel, which would be used on the premises, which is clearly an FTE, then yes, that could be considered a cost.
Thank you very much for replying to this question, Desmond.
Yeah.
So the next one, are any special rules for SMEs, or is it the same as, in example, big pharma?
Well, I think Polybius and I both referenced this. So if you can hit the criteria that you are an independent legal entity, then A, you're eligible to participate, and then B, if you're an independent legal entity, then generally on a single stage call, you are actually eligible for funding as well. Now, what may complicate the matter, and I'm just saying this because we're talking about big pharma here, you seem to be, if you're somehow connected or controlled by big pharma, which is an imprecise term, which I wouldn't be comfortable using anyway, then a question could come down to what your actual status is as an SME. But if you are an SME and you're an independent legally established entity, then generally, and you are from the EU or an associated country, then generally you are both eligible to participate and eligible for funding.
Next question is, does any consortium member be associated with IHI EU as private member or contributing partner?
So I'm not sure I'm not sure I'm completely understanding the question. So we'll just reiterate what we said about the contributing partner. The contributing partner first is not and may not and cannot be in any way associated with or affiliated to or directly a member of one of the private members. So a perfect example, if you are in the Irish Pharmaceutical Association and the Irish Pharmaceutical Association is associated with FPIA, then you cannot be a contributing partner because you are an affiliate of FPIA under the actual rules. So what we say in these situations is, and we mention it in the guide, and if you're contemplating becoming a contributing partner, Carolina will have that conversation with you to make sure, and you will say it in your application letter, it's absolutely sure that you have to be completely disconnected from the private members, the 4 private members of IHI to qualify as a contributing partner. And that is the very first step. Before you contemplate going any further, you ask yourself, what exactly am I? Do I have a connection? And everything proceeds from there.
Thank you very much. Another question for you, Desmond. Could you please once more state the eligibility for participation in the single stage IHI calls? Is it correct that entities from Switzerland and UK are not eligible to participate in single stage calls, even though national funding will be available?
Yeah, so yes, thank you for the question, and I think clarification is useful, because obviously there are, as I said, I think right at the start, we do have these nuances. So let me just reiterate, just for clarity. So if you are coming from the UK or you are coming from Switzerland, I think Polybius said exactly that. Participation is open to the entire world, as long as basically you're a clearly defined independent legal entity. So if you're coming from the UK or from Switzerland, you are very welcome to participate. And indeed, we have entities from the UK and Switzerland participating in IHI projects right now. So there's nothing unusual there. Where we draw the dividing line, and this is why we put it on a separate slide, is in relation to funding. So as we said, for example, if you're coming from Switzerland, you are currently receiving funding from the Swiss government. And before you get involved in the proposal, you talk to the Swiss government. And as I understand it, the Swiss government have a very, very well-evolved model for funding their participants who get involved in IHI project and Horizon Europe projects generally. If you are coming from the UK, then you are also completely welcome to participate. Now, what I would do then is I would refer you to the literature from the UK RI, which basically states, and this mirrors the IHI position, which is that in the proposal you identify as a beneficiary. You are identified as a beneficiary all the way through until we get to the grant agreement stage. Then we look again and we say, is there an association agreement in place between the UK and the EU, which we understand is in the process of being prepared, but obviously we don't know when it will be delivered. If there is no association agreement in place, then the UK entities will then participate as what's called associated partners. And you will recall me saying that an associated partner does not sign the grant agreement, but is identified in the grant agreement in Article 9. And then such UK entities, when they're participating, will not be funded by IHI, but will instead receive funding from the UK RI. So if you're coming from the UK, really the funding is the obligation of the UK government. And I would strongly urge, and I think I said this again a few slides ago, I would strongly urge you right now to find out exactly what's required to ensure that you do get funding from the UK RI, and then you know right from the start.
Thank you very much, Desmond. Next question, can academic participants, in example, public-owned and not-for-profit research organizations, take part in a consortium without being a contributing partner?
So it has been mentioned several times that in one consortium, you have to cover the full healthcare sector in terms of a value chain in order to address the objectives of the topic. In this consortium, you can have from hospitals, from SMEs, from academia, from large pharma companies, for example, from all the healthcare sector. Some of them are members and or contributing partners, putting the in-kind contribution. Why? Because if you are not a contributing partner or a private member, this contribution will not be counted against the 45%. Coming back to this question, if you're a hospital and at the same time you are public or private, you are entitled of the 100%. Imagine though that you're a very generous organization and you want to give some money to the JU, to the consortium, I'm sorry, in order to fund some of the cost. If you are not private member or a contributing partner, then this is not counted against the 45%. You should be either a private member or a contributing partner in order to your cost to be considered eligible and at the same time to be counted against this eligibility criterion of the 45%. Therefore, unacademic participants, yes, can be funded to 100%, and no contribution is expected from them since they are not private partners or contributing partners. In case they want to be a contributing partner, they have to prove with the scientific relevance and strategic relevance, like we said before, how this contribution can be relevant to the project and to the program.
Thank you very much, Polybius. Next question is addressed to Desmond. IHI keeps its right to object to exclusive grants or transfers or results only for non-EU countries, or also in case the granted party comes from a member state?
No, or thanks. That's actually a good question. No, right to object is primarily direct towards the transfer of such project results outside of the EU and the associated country sphere. So if it's a transfer inside Europe or inside the associated country sphere, then it's IHI wouldn't choose to use its objection.
Thank you. Then we have also a follow-up question. Then I must have misunderstood, and entities from Switzerland are eligible to participate in single and two-stage calls. Is that correct?
Yes, it's correct.
Right. Thank you very much. We have actually questions on the chat pertaining to where to reach the private members. So I'm gonna show you on the next slide how to book your meetings via the B2Match platform. If you're interested in having meetings with a potential partner, you just have to go to the platform and search for them. It's very easy and it only takes 4 easy steps. So first of all, you have to make yourself available. Otherwise, you will not be able to send a request for a meeting. Second, just look for a partner on the participants or organization tab. Third, select date, time, and attendees, up to 8 per meeting, and add a message. And fourth, just send the meeting request and wait for the reply. All the information and really step-by-step guide, it's available on the link that you see on the screen, and this presentation will be available in our website. Additionally, you can always go to the marketplace. As you can see in the number 1, just go on the top of your screen to the menu marketplace, then just go to the different options that there are. So project cooperation. Third, just you have to select the topic of your interest. And on the fourth, you will find the different topics and the different authors that are in there. Let's see if we have any other questions on the chat. Remember that now it's the moment to ask your questions, and we will reply to them. Otherwise, we will always be available via the applicant's mailbox. And I think there are no more questions for the moment. Remember that we will host another info session pertaining to the financial part this Thursday at 2 p.m., where Gaia will extensively explain all the details on how to prepare a successful proposal.
Did something just move there?
All right, so it's almost it's 4:28, almost 4:30. So with this, we reached the end of this info session. We're really happy that all of you attended, and we hope you learned something. Wait, we also got a last question. Is there a list of all private members available somewhere? We can always show you on the B2Match platform how to look for participants. And we have actually included interesting questions pertaining to their affiliation to the trade associations that are part of the IHI EU. So you just have to do a search basically through the platform, and you will be able to select any of these organizations that are affiliated.
Yeah, maybe just to augment that, if because we have had this question a lot, IHI, we don't keep completely comprehensive lists of the associations that the private members have, because obviously it's fluid. So what we would say is, if you suspect that you are indeed affiliated, what we would say is probably the best thing to do is actually go to the relevant private member directly and say, look, this is the organization that I'm from at a national level or even from a municipal level. Are we actually a member? And then they'll be able to confirm it for you. And as I said, they're quite accustomed to such queries at this stage.
All right. So thank you very much, Desmond, and thank you very much, Polybius, and thank you all for attending this session. And I wish you a nice evening.